Honorius III was Roman. A canon at the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore, he came to hold a number of important administrative positions, including that of Camerlengo. In 1197, he became tutor to the young Frederick II. As Pope, he worked to promote the Fifth Crusade, which had been planned under his predecessor, Innocent III. Honorius repeatedly exhorted King Andrew II of Hungary and Emperor Frederick II to fulfill their vows to participate. He also gave approval to the recently formed Dominican and Franciscan religious orders. He was born as a son of Americo, a member of the Roman Savelli family. The Roman people were greatly elated at the election, for Honorius III was himself a Roman, and by his extreme kindness had endeared himself to the hearts of all. The Fifth Crusade was endorsed by the Lateran Council of 1215, and Honorius started preparations for the crusade to begin in 1217. Far-reaching prospects seemed to open before him when Honorius crowned Peter II of Courtenay as Latin Emperor of Constantinople in April 1217. In July 1216, Honorius once again called upon Andrew II to fulfill his father's vow to lead a crusade. Though due to Frederick II's refusal to partake, the crusade resulted in disaster, though his crusades in the south of France would be successful. Gregory IX was an Agnini. The successor of Honorius III, he fully inherited the traditions of Gregory VII and of his own cousin, Innocent III. He received his education at the universities of Paris and Bologna. Gregory's bull Parens Scientiarum of 1231, after the University of Paris strike of 1229, resolved differences between the unruly university scholars of Paris and the local authorities. In 1233, Gregory IX established the Papal Inquisition to regularize the prosecution of heresy. In the 1234 decretals, he would outlaw followers of the Antichrist from holding power in Christian nations due to their hatred of Christ, as cited in the holy book of the Antichrist called the Talmud, thus suppressing them from open political influence until the rise of liberalism in the 19th century. In 1239, with the aid of Nicholas Donin, Gregory ordered that all copies of the book of the Antichrist called the Talmud be confiscated and later burned on the 12th of June, 1242 in Paris. Gregory IX endorsed the Northern Crusades and attempts to bring Orthodox Slavic peoples in communion with him. Gregory would be openly antagonistic to Frederick II, as he would send an army to invade Sicily, which would be crushed by Frederick. In 1239, Frederick would defeat the Lombard League and dominate all of Italy. Gregory would in turn excommunicate Frederick. At the Council of Regensburg, Gregory would be declared the Antichrist by the emperor's supporters. Celestine IV was Milanese. Goffredo or Godfrey is often referred to as son of a sister of Pope Urban III. Pope Gregory IX made him a cardinal on the 18th of September 1227 with the diocese and benefice of San Marco, and in 1228 to 1229 sent him as legate in Lombardy and Tuscany, where the cities and communes had generally remained true to the Hohenstaufen Emperor, Frederick II. He was dispatched in an attempt to bring these territories around to the papal side, but without success. In 1238, he was made Cardinal Bishop of Sabina. One group of cardinals, which included Sinibaldo de Fieschi, the future Pope Innocent IV, supported a candidate from the inner circle of Pope Gregory IX, who could be expected to pursue a hard line with Frederick II. Overtures to Frederick II, however, were met with the impossible demand that if they wished the cardinals in his hands to return to Rome, they must elect as Pope Otto of St. Nicholas, an amenable compromise figure. Only on the 25th of October 1241 was the Cardinal Bishop of Sabina finally elected by the required two-thirds majority, 7 cardinals out of 10. He took the name Pope Celestine IV. It is said that this was nevertheless long enough for him to proceed as his only significant act with the excommunication of Matteo Rosso Orsini. Celestine IV died before he could be crowned on the 10th of November 1241 of fatigue and old age, and was entombed in St. Peter's. Innocent IV was Genoese. Fieschi was born in Genoa to the noble merchant family of Fieschi in Ligurai. He studied at the universities of Parma and Bologna. He was considered in his own day and by posterity as a fine canonist, which would lead him to be brought to Rome and made a cardinal and governor of the March of Ancona. As pope, he inherited an ongoing dispute over lands seized by the Holy Roman Emperor, and the following year he traveled to France too from the excommunicated emperor. He would believe himself ruler of the world in not only spiritual sense but also secularly. Citing himself as the vicar of Christ, he believed that through his status he could rule over any and all foreign nations. When he attempted this with the Mongols, they in turn would request that he personally come to their imperial capital of Karakorum, seeking to overthrow Manfred, the son of Frederick II and King of Sicily, as well as integrate all of southern Italy into the papal state. Innocent would lead an army and conquer Naples, only to fall onto his deathbed and hear of Manfred's victory at Foggia against the papal legate, his nephew the Cardinal Guglielmo Fieschi. During his time as pope, he would appoint his nephews Opizzo as the Latin Patriarch of Antioch, and Ottobuono as Cardinal Deacon of St. Andriano, respectively. Ottobuono would become Pope Adrian V in 1276. Alexander IV was Genoese. He was born as Rinaldo di Genne in Jena. He was, on his mother's side, a member of the family de Conti di Segni, the Counts of Segni, like Pope Innocent III and Pope Gregory IX. His reign would be marked by efforts for reunification of Catholic rites, establishment of the Inquisition in France, and a crusade against the Tatars. In 1256, Alexander IV condemned theories of Joachim of Fiore, whose ideas were taken up by the Fraticelli strand of the Franciscan order. Joachim believed that by 1260, that the church would no longer be necessary. He would fail to place Edmund, the second son of King Henry III of England, as ruler of Sicily due to Manfred's firm hold on the island. This failure would prove financially disastrous for the English monarchy and led to the Second Barons' War. On the 12th of April, 1261, shortly before his death, Alexander issued a papal bull for King Henry that absolved him and the magnates of his realm from the oaths taken in the Provisions of Oxford, which was instrumental in the war. Unable to go against the imperial Hohenstaufens, who held the support of the Roman people, the Pope fled to Viterbo. He was buried in Viterbo Cathedral, but his tomb was destroyed during 16th century renovations. Urban IV was French. He was not a cardinal. Only a few popes since his time have not been cardinals, including Gregory X, Urban V, and Urban VI. Though Pantaleon was the son of a cobbler of Troyes, France, his genius in common law and theology would gain the attention of Pope Innocent IV, who would send him on mission with the Teutonic Knights against the Prussians. He would be made the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem by Pope Alexander IV. Though he would fail to save the Latin Empire from the Byzantines, he would lay the groundwork for Charles of Anjou, lead a campaign to take the Kingdom of Sicily from Manfred, 2 years after Urban's death. He would have Thomas Aquinas write the texts for the Mass and office of the feast. There is a story that the Pope's death was related to the Great Comet of 1264, when he fell sick at some time near the arrival of the comet, and then he died when the comet disappeared. Clement IV was French, was the Bishop of Le Puy, Archbishop of Narbonne, and later Cardinal of Sabina prior to his taking of the papacy. Pope Clement was a patron of Thomas Aquinas, making him a papal theologian, and of Roger Bacon, encouraging Bacon in the writing of his Opus Majus, which included important treatises on optics and the scientific method. Born the son of a lawyer in Saint-Gilles-du-Gard in the Languedoc region of France, he would become a soldier of Christ in the war against the Moors, after which he would take study of law and become a noted advocate in Paris. Becoming secretary to St. King Louis IX, he would marry and have 2 daughters. On the death of his wife, he would follow his father's example and join the church, and rapidly rose through the ranks. As Pope, he would continue the destruction of the Antichrist's Talmud, see the Duke of Anjou crowned King of Sicily, and attempted to form an alliance between France, the Mongol Ilkhanate, and the Byzantines, so another crusade would be made in the Holy Land. Within months, Clement IV was dead as well, and was buried at the Dominican convent. Santa Maria in Gradi, just outside Viterbo, where he resided throughout his pontificate. In 1885, his remains were transferred to the church, San Francesco alla Rocca in Viterbo. Owing to irreconcilable divisions among the cardinals, the papal throne remained vacant for nearly 3 years. Gregory X was Piacentino. He was elected at the conclusion of a papal election that ran from 1268 to 1271, the longest papal election in the history of the Catholic Church. He convened the Second Council of Lyon and also made new regulations in regards to the papal conclave. Gregory was beatified by Pope Clement XI in 1713 after the confirmation of his cultus. Born Teobaldo Visconti, he would spend his life in the church, working for the Pope Gregory IX in France, befriending St. Louis, and calling for a crusade against the Holy Roman Emperor. As Pope, he would see Niccolo, Maffeo, and Marco Polo journey to the great Khan Kublai, offering him some oil from the lamp of the Holy Sepulchre. The Ilkhanate leader Abakar would attempt to spur an alliance with Gregory, who in turn wished to begin a major crusade, though plans for this would end after his death. The Second Ecumenical Council met at Lyon, beginning on the 1st of May 1274, for the purpose of considering the East-West Schism, the condition of the Holy Land, and the abuses of the Catholic Church. He commenced the cause of canonization of King Louis IX of France in 1272, an act which bestowed on the king who had died in August 1270 the title of Servant of God. He beatified Lucretius Modestini in 1274 with the confirmation of his cultus. Innocent V was Burgundian. A member of the Order of Preachers, he acquired a reputation as an effective preacher. He held one of the 2 Dominican chairs at the University of Paris, and was instrumental in helping with drawing up the program of studies for the order. In 1269, Peter of Tarentaise was provincial of the French province of Dominicans. He was a close collaborator of Pope Gregory X, who named him Bishop of Ostia and raised him to cardinal in 1273. Upon the death of Gregory in 1276, Peter was elected pope, taking the name Innocent V. He died about 5 months later, but during his brief tenure facilitated a peace between Genoa and King Charles I of Sicily. Pope Innocent V was beatified in 1898 by Pope Leo XIII. Innocent was able to arrange a peace treaty between Genoa and Naples, which was signed on the 18th of June, 1276. He was buried in the Lateran Basilica, in a magnificent tomb built by King Charles. Unfortunately, the tomb was destroyed by the 2 14th century fires at the Basilica in 1307 and 1361. Pope Innocent V was the author of several works of philosophy, theology, and canon law, including commentaries on the Pauline epistles and on the sentences of Peter Lombard. He is sometimes referred to as Famosissimus Doctor. Adrian V was Genoese. He was an envoy of Pope Clement IV sent to England in May 1265, who successfully completed his task of resolving disputes between King Henry III of England and his barons. Adrian V was elected pope following the death of Innocent V, but died of natural illness before being ordained to the priesthood. In the Divine Comedy, Dante meets Adrian V in the 5th terrace of Purgatorio, where Adrian V cleanses for the vice of avarice. Ottobuono belonged to a feudal family of Liguria, the Fieschi, Counts of Lavagna. He would gain his first clerical position in 1243. He was sent to England in 1265 by Pope Clement IV to mediate between King Henry III of England and his barons, and to preach the Crusades. Fieschi was related distantly by affinity to Henry III. His sister had married Thomas II of Savoy, who was a cousin of Henry's wife, Eleanor of Provence. Under the influence of Charles I of Anjou, he was elected pope to succeed Innocent V on the 11th of July 1276, but died at Viterbo on the 18th of August 1276 from illness, without ever having been ordained to the priesthood. He is buried there in the church of San Francesco alla Rocca. His funeral monument is attributed to Arnolfo di Cambio. Adrian V was the third pope in the Year of Four Popes of 1276. He annulled Pope Gregory X's bull on the holding of papal conclaves, but died before enacting new regulations. John the 21st was the only Portuguese pope. He is sometimes identified with the logician and herbalist Peter of Spain, which would make him the only pope to have been a physician. Born in Lisbon, he would go to school of the Lisbon Cathedral and later join the University of Paris, conducing study on medicine, theology, logic, physics, metaphysics, and Aristotle's dialectic. At the court in Lisbon, he was the counselor and spokesman for King Afonso, the third in church matters. Later, he became prior of Guimarães. He was archdeacon of Vermoim in the Archdiocese of Braga. Upon his bid for the bishopric of Lisbon being defeated, he would become the master of the school of Lisbon. Peter became the physician of Pope Gregory X, who would later grant him the Archbishop of Braga, only to then make him Cardinal Bishop of Tusculum. As Pope, he attempted to issue crusade for the Holy Land, mend the East-West schism, convert the Tatars, and maintain peace among the Christian nations. Though his efforts would prove in vain, as his reign would be short-lived. On the 14th of May, 1277, while the Pope was alone in this apartment, the ceiling collapsed. John was rescued alive from beneath the rubble. However, he died of his serious injuries days later. He was buried in the Duomo di Viterbo, where his tomb can still be seen. The original porphyry sarcophagus was destroyed during the cathedral's 16th century refurbishment and was replaced with a more modest one in stone, with the Pope's effigy. Nicholas III was Roman. He was a Roman nobleman who had served under 8 popes and eventually became pope through family influence. Born Giovanni Gaetano Orsini, of the powerful Italian Orsini family, and son of Roman nobleman Matteo Rosso Orsini by his first wife, Perna Caetani. The Orsini family had already produced several popes, namely Stephen II, Paul I, and Celestine III. As Pope, he would have to contend with King Charles of Sicily's increasing influence in church affairs and operation of the Papal States. To counteract this, Nicholas issued a new constitution of Rome, Fundamenta Militantis, which forbade foreigners from taking civil office. It depends for its justification not only on the biblical phrase, tu es Petrus, et super Hans Petram edificabo ecclesiam meam, but also on the forged donations of Constantine. He would be accused by his detractors as being nepotistic and corrupt. Pope Nicholas III was stricken ill quite unexpectedly. According to the Chronicon Parmense, he was suddenly deprived of consciousness and movement. Bartholomeus of Lucca says, suddenly stricken with apoplexy, he died without speaking. Nicholas was unable to make his confession and died at his palace at Castro Soriano in the Diocese of Viterbo. His remains were taken to Rome, where he was buried in the Vatican Basilica in the Chapel of St. Nicholas, though it has been rumored he had been poisoned. Martin IV was French. He was the last French pope to have held court in Rome. All subsequent French popes held court in Avignon. Simon de Brion, son of Jean, Sieur de Brion, was born at the chateau of Mainpincien, Ile-de-France, France, in the decade following 1210. He would eventually become Archdeacon of Rouen, and in 1259 he would become Chancellor of St. Louis IX of France. During Nicholas III's papacy, he would be encouraged to have France build an alliance with the King of Leon and Castile in opposing the Angevin dynasty that was scattered around Europe. After a Roman mob had broke into the episcopal palace and abducted the cardinals Matteo Rosso Orsini and Giordano Orsini, Simon de Brion was unanimously elected to the papacy and took the name Martin IV. He would never visit Rome during his papacy and would soon hand over his Roman senatorial power to King Charles of Anjou. Martin would aid Charles by excommunicating both the Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII Palaeologus, firmly cementing the East-West schism, and Peter III of Aragon, whom he would seek to declare a crusade against. Though Martin would die, stricken by a sudden illness on Easter Wednesday, he was buried in the Cathedral of San Lorenzo in Perugia. Honorius IV was Roman. During his pontificate, he largely continued to pursue the pro-French political policy of his predecessor, Martin IV. Giacomo Savelli was born in Rome into the rich and influential family of the Savelli, with his maternal family belonging to the Aldobrandeschi family. He was the last pope to be married before ordination. Honorius IV was already advanced in age, and so severely affected with gout, or arthritis, that he could neither stand nor walk. When saying Mass, he was obliged to sit in a specially constructed chair, and at the elevation of the host his hands had to be raised by a mechanical contrivance. His reign would mark hostilities between the papacy and Charles of Anjou. After the Aragonese takeover of Sicily by King James II of Sicily would be excommunicated and declared his line of successors as being invalid to the Sicilian throne. Though it is important to note that papal relations with Aragon itself would become notably less hostile. Through the efforts of King Edward I of England, negotiations for peace were begun by Honorius IV and King Alfonso III. The Pope, however, did not live long enough to complete these negotiations, which finally resulted in a peaceful settlement of the Aragonese as well as the Sicilian question in 1302 under Pope Boniface VIII. He would be well liked in not only Rome, but also throughout the empire. Honorius IV's tomb is located at Santa Maria in Aracoeli. Nicholas IV was Ascolani. He was the first Franciscan to be elected pope. Jerome Maschi was a pious, peace-loving man whose goals as a Franciscan friar were to protect the church, promote the Crusades, and root out heresy. He would be among the groups sent by Gregory X to meet with Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII, Palaiologos, in Constantinople. He would be made cardinal priest by Nicholas III in 1278 and promoted to Cardinal Bishop of Palestrina by Martin IV in 1281. As Pope, he would grant independence of the College of Cardinals, which, in the following century, was to be of detriment to the papacy. In 1288, Nicholas met with the Nestorian Christian Rabban Bar Salma to form a Franco-Mongol alliance. In May 1289, he crowned Charles II as King of Sicily, after the latter had expressly recognized papal suzerainty, and in February 1291 concluded a treaty with Kings Alfonso III of Aragon and Philip IV of France, looking toward the expulsion of James II of Aragon from Sicily. The loss of Acre in 1291 stirred Nicholas IV to renewed enthusiasm for a crusade. He sent missionaries, among them the Franciscan John of Montecorvino, to labor among the Bulgarians, Ethiopians, Mongols, Tatars, and Chinese. Nicholas IV died in Rome on the 4th of April, 1292, in the palace which he had built next to the Liberian Basilica. He was buried in the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore. Saint Celestine V was Isernini. He was also a monk and hermit who founded the Order of the Celestines as a branch of the Benedictine order. He was elected pope in the Catholic Church's last non-conclave papal election, ending a 2-year impasse. Among the few edicts of his to remain in force was the confirmation of the right of the Pope to resign. Nearly all of his other official acts were annulled by his successor, Boniface VIII. On the 13th of December 1294, a week after issuing the decree, Celestine resigned, stating his desire to return to his humble pre-papal life. He was subsequently imprisoned by Boniface in the castle of Fumone in the Lazio region, in order to prevent his potential installation as antipope. He died in prison on the 19th of May, 1296, at the age of 81. Celestine was canonized on the 5th of May, 1313, by Pope Clement V, by the request of Philip IV of France due to his opposition to Boniface. No subsequent pope has taken the name Celestine. The next pope to resign of his own accord was Gregory XII in 1415 to help end the Western Schism, followed by Benedict XVI in 2013, 719 years later. Boniface VIII was Anagnani. The Caetani family was of baronial origin, with connections to the papacy. He spent his early career abroad in diplomatic roles. Boniface VIII put forward some of the strongest claims of any pope to temporal as well as spiritual power. He involved himself often with foreign affairs, including in France, Sicily, Italy, and the First War of Scottish Independence. Boniface's continual conflicts with Philip IV of France ultimately culminating when in 1302 Boniface issued the bull Unum Sanctam, which declares all kings are subordinate to the power of the Roman pontiff. The Pope would demand in 1303 that the French king personally come to the papal court and explain his behavior. Marching with an army, King Philip and his minister Nogaret would be excommunicated on their meeting with the Pope. In turn, they branded the Pope's abdication, to which the Pope responded he would sooner die, causing him to be slapped. The king sent his troops to attack the Pope's residence in Anagni on the 7th of September 1303 and capture him. Boniface was held for 3 days and beaten. He died of a violent fever on the 11th of October, in full possession of his senses and in the presence of 8 cardinals and the chief members of the papal household, after receiving the sacraments and making the usual profession of faith. The body of Boniface VIII was buried in 1303 in a special chapel that also housed the remains of Pope Boniface IV, which had been moved by Boniface VIII from a tomb outside the Vatican Basilica in the portico.